Dan Beatty, welcome to the Preconstruction Podcast.
Hey, Gareth. Nice to see you.
Wonderful. Boy, am I glad to see your face. I have been trying to get a roads and bridges subject matter expert for some time. Your name kept cropping up, so thank you very much for giving up your time.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Good. So,
Appreciate
Dan,
that.
let's get straight into it. For anybody that doesn't know you, give us just a quick overview of your background and where you're at right now.
Well, I've been in the business for about 35 years, civil engineer from University of Maryland. And the roads and bridges piece, I got to actually credit my parents. They said, you're trying to figure out what you want to do, and there are always going to be a need for roads and bridges. Just because the Jetsons had flying cars doesn't mean that we're there yet. And we still have trucks that destroy the roads, and you still need bridges. So that was actually pretty good advice. And I got into my career, worked with some of the most iconic projects and companies on the East Coast. I was involved with, when I was at Bechtel, there was a job for that we bid the bridge across the river from Detroit into Canada. We didn't actually win it, but it was a very exciting project to get involved with. So I've been a part of that for a long time. I was in the field for years, and then I turned into estimating probably at the turn of this century, about 2000, 2001, and I've been doing it ever since.
Brilliant. Talk to me about the transition because we talked to it before. I know you're a big advocate for getting people into construction, getting people in to consider pre-construction and estimating. Give us your own story.
Well, the thing about estimating, it's almost like when I was coming up, the young guys in the field, I say guys, I should say young ladies too, more so nowadays. But when I got started, the idea was, well, you got to be out in the field. You got to be where things are happening. You got to be where the rubber meets the road. And going into the office, estimating, who wants to do that? But after a while, when you're out in the field and it gets hot and dirty, and you've been working 60, sometimes 70 hours a week, and maybe you have a baby, or maybe you have a spouse that says, gosh, you are never here, or whatever. Then you start thinking, well, what can I do differently and not, completely lose what I've been doing? And so that's kind of what happened to me. It was like I had young kids and they needed some help in the office on a great big job we were bidding. I was working for Shirley Contracting at the time, and they bid the largest job that Virginia Department of Transportation ever put out. It was a Springfield interchange. I came into the office, I helped them estimate it, had a lot of fun doing it actually. And then when we got the job, that was my last job in the field. I was a project manager on that job for all of the structures. There were 15 bridges on that interchange.
Wow.
And then when it was over, I kind of went to the president and I said, you know what, Mike, I really kind of like the estimating piece. What do you think about me coming in and just doing it? And that's what I did. And it turned out to be a great opportunity. I worked for a fantastic vice president of estimating, Dan Climore. He's still there. And he taught me everything I never ever learned about the business. And I've been estimating ever since and at different levels.
Wow, what a project. Shout out to Dan as well. What a project to be involved in. Not only to take through estimating, but then to go on and deliver. I mean, 15 bridges, huge undertaking. For
Yeah.
anybody, and listen, we get loads of listeners from anybody from high school kids, graduates, civil engineering. For anybody out there that doesn't understand the nuances of estimating or building bridges, give us a quick overview of the A. You can use that project as an example. What's it like estimating a bridge?
Well, bridges, if you understand how they're designed from the top down, basically, which is kind of anti-intuitive, or it's not intuitive because it's like, well, why wouldn't you go from the bottom up? And the reason is it's what's the loading, how much how much traffic is going to be on it, and then you have to work your way down so that you have the right foundation. So if you don't know the loads, how do you design the base? So that's how you do it. You design it from top to bottom, and then you estimate it. in a similar fashion is like anything else, whether it's a simple overpass or whether it's the Gordie Howe Bridge that goes across a giant river. You break it down into small pieces. You say there's a substructure, which is the base, the foundation. What's it based on? Are there piles? Is it drilled shafts? What kind of piers are you talking about? Then you worry about the superstructure, which is, okay, is it a cable stayed bridge? Is it steel? Is it precast concrete? How thick is the deck? So you break it into different parts and pieces, and then you put it all together as how would you build it? The way I estimate is I have to visualize it in the field. And that's why I feel like any estimator or pre-construction person worth their salt should have at least spent some time in the field so they could physically see how things are put together and what's it like. What is the access? Can you get a crane in there? Is there water involved? What's the water level, if you're going to start excavating? Do you need sheeting yeah, I mean, there's so many different things that come up that you have to think about. And that's why I think it's so important for somebody to be out in the field first so that you can visualize. I mean, I don't know about you, but cookbook estimating bugs me quite a bit. It's like, whoa, we have all these metrics. There's 0.25 man hours per cubic yard. I'm like, what does that mean? I mean, that's great to check against what you're talking about, but it's not like, who thinks like that? Who
Yeah.
thinks in those terms? You think, how long would a crew of 5 people take to form and pour this footing?
Yeah.
That's the way I estimate
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then the metrics spit out from that, and then it's more of a check.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, in
Absolutely.
essence.
I love it. Yeah, and that's a great high level overview of how to do a bridge. That kind of leads me into the next thing: the popularity of design build, especially these big projects. Is it something that you saw coming? Has that always been that case over your 35 years experience? And why is it so important, the design build aspect?
I think what happened, Gareth, when I first got started in this business, it was mainly bid build. The DOTs had large staffs. They had engineers designing, and they were a lot more hands-on in those days. And I think the design build, you could see it coming mainly because they weren't able to sustain that, you know. And the time that it took to put a project out was incredibly long. So, in order to have procurement that made sense, they decided, well, let's get involved. We already contract with a lot of these outside agencies, these outside, engineering firms. So let's create a procurement way of doing things that can kind of streamline things. And I think in the beginning it was difficult because they didn't want to let go of their control. They felt like, oh my gosh, we were able to control every little aspect of this, and now we kind of have to let it go. But after the first couple of projects, especially, what I'm familiar with is in Virginia, they had a couple of examples where it worked really, really well. And again, I got to give a shout out to Shirley. They were one of the leaders in this area in getting design build going. And once that occurred, once they started to realize this is a great way to actually do things, you know, and you're going to get a better product because when a lot of times engineers work in a silo, and they'll design things and they'll like put dimensions on that make no sense. Like who forms something to 11/16? Stop. You get a contractor who comes in and says, "Hey, engineer, here's what you do. You make all of the caps of the bridge the same size." Well, you don't have to because you're going to lose concrete. I'm like, hey, if we're forming it the same way over and over, you save money with labor. Oh, well, that makes sense. Let's do that. And that's kind of the evolution, and it's sort of been sort of a back and forth learning process between the contractor, the engineer, and the owner. And as time passed, everybody got a lot more comfortable with it. And frankly, why would you go back to the other way? It's
Yeah.
working really well,
And
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 there's
and
no reason to change.
collaboration. It's ideal. Everybody's learning. The engineer are now thinking a little bit like a general contractor, and the general
Right.
contractor is giving the feedback to the engineer. So the next project that they do, they'll have lived and learned. I love it. Yeah,
Exactly.
and that makes sense. And to be honest with you, on the non-residential, on the commercial side, it's very very similar with the negotiated stuff.
Hmm.
And I love that. And it kind of the design build side. It brings me to my next, and I think it's something that you're really concentrated on with your level, and it's the go no go strategies when it comes to selecting a project that you want to bid for within your company. Throughout the years, these are things that are evolving. People are now in a position where they can turn down work and say, you know what, that's not in line with what our company does, or I haven't got the capability of doing that. Before it was win the job, get the job, and then figure out how to build it. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. What has happened is there's lots of competition out there, obviously, and it's a cutthroat business. Let's not put any you know happy face on that. It just is what it is. And what has happened, you have different tiers of contractors. So if you're on the smaller end, I don't know if you're a general, maybe you're a specialty contractor. Well, then you still might have to have that mindset. It still might have to be shotgun approach. I got to get whatever I can get, so be it. But as you move up the ladder in tiers based on the size and the complexity of the company, well, then you start thinking about, well, what are we really good at? What is our core mission? Why do we exist? I remember we went through this whole design, they're trying to figure out what our mission statement was at one of the companies I worked for. And we had guys sitting around the table, and they were crusty veterans, and I asked them a question. I said, well, why did you get into the construction business? And to a person, they all said, well, I wanted to work outside, and I really wanted to be able to look at stuff and say, I had something to do with creating this. And so when it came time for our table to talk about it, I stood up and said, well, we build cool stuff. That's our mission. And the whole room's like, well, there it is. Now, that's not exactly what their mission statement is, but it was close.
Yeah.
And so from no go to go, what a company has to do is it's got to be honest with itself. It's like, why do we exist and what do we do well?
Yeah.
And once you know that, you are able, as you said, to turn work down that doesn't fit into what your competencies are, because you can really get yourself in trouble
Yeah.
if you do something that you're really not sure about. I mean, construction is a very risk averse business as well. So, we've got risk management, we have all of that stuff trying to back ourselves up. And you just don't want to get out there doing something that you have no idea what you're doing. It's like if you've never done water work, then don't get yourself involved in a tunnel job underneath a body of water. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
So that's how it's kind of evolved. And the other thing I would say is, as a company gets larger and larger, they need to diversify in that don't stay in one particular niche unless that niche is so unique and difficult that nobody else wants to do it. Then you can make a great living at it. But if you just stay in one particular niche, like roads and bridges, there's enough of those that either need to be built new or rehabilitated that you can have a fine career. But if that's not your niche, like maybe you have a water treatment part of your company, and maybe you have, utilities part. Focus on what you're good at and don't wander too far from your core competencies. Otherwise, you're probably going to get yourself in trouble.
Yeah, and I think that's where the go no go strategy has come out of. Too many companies getting themselves in trouble, and essentially what they're probably trying to do is reduce the risk and increase the profitability, and the idea that we can deliver this for a certain amount of money, and it's working well for a lot of companies.
Yeah.
And if you implement it well, then it's worth its weight in gold. And then that kind of brings me back to I want to get your experience on this because I mean, looking through the companies that you've worked with, Crowder, Shirley, Lee, most recently Lane, Bechtel, and now Alberici, there's some great companies there. Talk to me about the changes, the successful changes that you have seen in processes when it comes to estimating, workflows, even technology. What are you seeing in that roads and bridges space?
Well, the technology piece definitely makes a big difference. And one thing, a person like myself who, when I got started, there was no Excel spreadsheet. It was Lotus 123. I don't know if you'd probably have to Google that to find
I
out what
heard
that
it. No,
was.
I've heard of it.
And so, I've tried to grow along with it. And to be honest with you, the younger generations are much better at technology than I am. But what I bring to the table is, I've seen enough work and types of work and workflows that, I'm able to say, okay, well, this is what we should be doing. Why don't you help me figure out the most efficient way to get there technology wise?
I like it.
So that's where it comes from. It's like as long as you don't overtax somebody, then say, oh my gosh, you have so much work that you can't get it done and you have no work-life balance. That's not good. But what's been happening that I've noticed is that the companies I've been working for really dig into the details of the individual projects. They spend the time doing the due diligence. And that's really what the shotgun approach is really not ideal. You don't
Yeah.
want to do that. You want to be able to thoroughly vet what you're working on and come up with a great plan. And the other part is really integrate with the field. Bring in superintendents, foremen, project managers, get their take on things, be more collaborative. I think that's another thing that I have seen over my career that has gotten better as time has gone on is the ability to communicate, the ability to collaborate to come up with the best plan. And that talks back to the design build aspect
Yeah.
because when you do the design build, part of what you're turning into the owner is a technical proposal, which basically says, here's the story of the job. This is where we think it's supposed to be run. These are our processes, and these are the things that we think will work well for you. So it's not just dollars and cents, it's what's the plan? What's the story of the job?
Yeah.
What is the whole picture? And you can't do something like that in a couple of weeks. I mean, it's got to take a lot of people, a lot of collaboration, and a lot of working together. And I think that's what some people don't understand about our industry. When you talk about wanting to attract others into it or retain people, if you thought about how creative of a process this is and the ability for a diverse group of people to get together to try to create something that doesn't exist yet. I mean, I think that's pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah. And
So,
that leads us nicely on to the next thing that's close to your heart is retaining recruiting, retaining and developing people. Because as you say, the roads look simple. It looks like a road that was dug up, bit of soil put down, gradient on top, bit of tarmac, and then that's it. But it's way more complex and it's way more enjoyable getting to that. So, in your experience, workforce development and mentoring, tell me about it through your career so far. And I liked what you said there about the reverse mentoring of you have got the experience, the ideas, the technology, younger people are coming through with that, and you're almost pivoting off each other.
well, I think the key is construction as an industry needs to do a much better job of describing what we do. Because unfortunately, there seems to be a perception out there, especially by people that are in school or even down to childhood, is that construction is a dirty business, and only people that do that are people that aren't able to do anything else, which is such a disservice to what we do, because there are highly trained, highly technically creative people working in this industry. And the need is to get that message to people and let them realize, no, this is an incredibly creative, collaborative process. There are things about what we do that are really valuable to our society, and that message isn't getting out, unfortunately. And as I was told you when we talked previously, we have a daughter in school getting a civil engineering degree, and she had an internship with the company, and they basically scared her to death by saying, "Well, you're going to be working 60 hours a week, and you're not going to have a personal life, and I would recommend you don't have baby." I mean, stop! What are you doing? You can't do that to young people. It's horrible. Um, so I think that the challenge is for our industry is to tell the story. And that's why I like what you're doing, Gareth. You're trying to tell the story of what this industry does. Roads and bridges, which is the focus of what we're talking about today. Listen, it's not just getting to the store. It's trucks on the highway bringing goods to market. It's, the interstate highway was designed in the 50s mainly because we needed to be able to move our military from coast to coast. I mean, it has overarching needs, It's something that we all probably take for granted, but it is so
Absolutely.
vitally important to our society that roads and bridges take care of. Just during COVID, I taught my youngest to drive because nobody was on the road.
Brilliant.
Everybody was stuck inside. But you know what else was going on? Construction was deemed a necessary thing, and it went on through COVID.
Yeah, Dan, I couldn't agree more. To me, it's incredible. It's a pivotal crossroad that we're at now with construction. If you think about the 60s and 70s, it was all financial services. Everybody, the whole story, when you were at parties, when you were picking up your kid at school, when you were at sports games, everybody was talking about how flashy and cool financial services were. Then it was tech, then it was Facebook, Google, all these companies. It's not that tech's in a little bit of a downward spiral. Now it should be construction. And it's like we're doing a great job, you especially, and anybody that's not following Dan Beatty on LinkedIn, please do so. I will put his LinkedIn profile in his show notes. Follow him, doing great work with books that are read to children to get them thinking about construction, to get it in their head, get it in their subconscious. So it's up to everyone in construction to talk at sports stadiums, to talk to people, your friends, your family, your peers. Talk to them about a career in construction because there's so many options. But I totally agree with you. But I like one thing that you said to me on LinkedIn as well is that the mindset of construction needs to change. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I don't know if you're familiar with the DISC assessment, DISC. The D is a driver, and the C is, I think it means collaborator. But the construction industry that I've been in for my whole career is dominated, and I mean literally dominated by people that are D's and C's, mostly D. And I can describe a D as hard driving, command and control, my way or the highway, throw the stake in the ground and let's make this thing happen. And that's the way it is. If you happen to not be a person with one of those letter designations, you're going to have a very hard time in this industry. And I think that that needs to change because people with so-called soft skills, and by the way, I really can't stand that word, but that's what we have. People that know how to collaborate, people that know how to communicate, people that take the time to explain and mentor and think, well, wait a minute, how is this going to affect other people? How, that kind of stuff. It's not as prevalent. And I personally have been struggling with it my entire career because I happen to be one of those people that wants to communicate, that wants to do things in a reasonable way. And a lot of times, if you've got superintendents that say, no, we just got to get the work done. I'm not going to worry about being nice to you. I'm not going to worry about whether somebody's bullying you. I'm just going to go out there and I'm going to make it happen. That's why construction has gotten the black eye that it has, is that there still is a piece of it where that kind of behavior is allowed. And that really needs to change. It's something that I'm very passionate about because I don't care for it at all. I don't think, well, I had to do this, so you do too. I'd rather give somebody the benefit of my experience and say, oh, God, don't do that. I did it and it was a horrible mistake. Here, let me tell you what I think would be a better way to do it. That's not as prevalent. At least it hasn't been in my career. I've run into places where it's just not done. And so the mindset of people in construction, when I got started, it was the Wild West. Safety was not what it is today. Back then, it was like tie off. What's that? Well, all right, I'm exaggerating, but it's changed. The culture of construction has changed with respect to safety, right? Like now it is like the biggest thing, rightfully so. Well, what I'd like to see happen is a culture change that is more person-centric, where a person is valued. Otherwise, I don't know if the robots are going to completely take over, but one of the reasons why robots are becoming more and more acceptable is that dealing with people is unique and different, and it requires finesse, and it requires the ability to communicate. And so just because construction is a hard industry, soft skills are really, really incredibly important.
Yeah.
Communicating, emotional intelligence, treating people the way you want to be treated. It's simple stuff, not done as much as I'd like to see happen. So that's part of, as I enter the last of my career, I want to pass it along to the next generations. Hey, this is what I've learned along the way, and can we please treat each other better?
Dan, incredible. That is incredibly powerful. And I want to thank you as well for taking that stance on it and that line on it. I can guarantee you there's going to be people in my inbox asking me questions about that. Would you mind if I put your LinkedIn profile below? If they have any
Absolutely.
follow, love it.
Be
Especially with
happy
it
to.
within any questions, because there's not many people with that mindset, and it was really well explained. And the more people like you we get into our industry, the better chance we have of recruiting, retaining, and developing our talent. And your story is even more powerful because I believe that pre-construction and estimating is where the biggest decisions are made. But I also believe that some of the smartest people that we have are sitting as a superintendent, an APM, a project engineer, and they're getting fed up with construction. We need to reach
Absolutely.
out, put our arm around them, bring them into pre-construction, use the experience that they've had on the field, and have them making really important decisions every hour of every day. So
Absolutely.
that's brilliant. Well, I can't think of a better way of finishing. And believe it or not, we haven't spoke about 2 or 3 topics. So I think in a few months we might be calling you again, Dan, for a quick call.
Happy to do it. And I'm thrilled that you're doing this, Gareth. I think it's really necessary. And, like I said, I have spent my entire career in this industry. I have a love-hate relationship with it, quite frankly. And I'd like to see it do better. We need to do better
Brilliant.
because there's just too much to be done. It's too necessary for our society and our way of life. And to not give it the attention it needs and deserves, we're going to hurt ourselves. And so got to do it.
One thing, and when I finish with this, I'll be interested your opinion on this. One thing is a real breath of fresh air for me, Dan, is the people like yourself that are within these companies that aren't being respectful. They're being like, this is the only way to do it. There's a lot of, in the last 10 or 15 years, a lot of like companies have come out of the big firms and started themselves, and they are now pre-construction services focused, people focused, collaboration focused, and they are killing it. And that's across infrastructure, it's across commercial construction. So if anybody's stuck in a company that's not doing that for them, there's loads of options out there.
Well, they're dinosaurs, and they rightfully should end up not being successful.
Yeah.
And remember, in all things like this, it starts at the top.
Yeah.
If you have different superintendents or people that don't treat each other right, it's up to the people that are above them to say, no, that's not acceptable, and you are no longer welcome here. That's what needs to happen.
Yeah.
And the problem is that sometimes these people are high achievers that act this way. They make money for you. And so it's like, all right, well, what do you value? Is it money, or is it doing good work and being able to look in the mirror?
Yeah.
I personally would much rather be able to look in the mirror, although I don't know if I like what's been happening to me. But other than that,
It's coming to us all, Dan. Don't worry.
other than that, remember, it does start at the top, and it
Lovely.
does, and that's the only way a people-centric company is going to survive, is that the people that are in charge make it undeniably so.
Yeah, and that's the culture thing. Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Gareth. My pleasure.